The letter trembled in Margaret Wilson's hands as the stagecoach rattled over another rut in the dusty road. April 1875, and here she was, 22 years old, traveling alone across the frontier to marry a man she'd never met. The advertisement had seemed like salvation after her parents' passing left her with nothing but debts and painful memories of a once comfortable Boston life. "You look like you might be sick, miss," said the elderly woman seated across from her. "First time out west." Margaret folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her reticule. "Yes, madam, I'm traveling to meet my fiancé in Silver Creek, Arizona Territory." The woman's eyebrows rose. "Mail order bride," Margaret flushed. "I prefer to think of it as a practical arrangement, Mr. James Peterson owns a successful ranch. He requires a wife and I require." She trailed off, unwilling to admit the desperate circumstances that had driven her to this decision. "Security," the woman finished for her with unexpected kindness. "No shame in that, dear. My Ezra and I started that way 40 years ago, though I recommend laying eyes on the man before you say any vows." "His letters were most gentlemanly," Margaret said, touching her reticule. "He described himself as 36, established, God-fearing, and in need of companionship." The woman patted Margaret's knee. "Well, Silver Creek's still 3 days away if the weather holds. Plenty of time to settle your nerves." Margaret smiled weakly. Her trunk contained everything she had left in the world: 3 dresses, her mother's pearls, a few keepsakes, and the wedding dress she'd sewn during the long evenings after her seamstress work was done. The last 6 months had been a lesson in survival, taking in mending and alterations after her father's failed investments, and sudden heart attack left her alone and destitute. The stagecoach made good time that day, stopping at a way station as dusk approached. It was little more than a wooden building with a stable attached, but the sight of it brought relief to Margaret's aching body. The long journey from Boston had left her exhausted. Inside, the station keeper's wife served a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee. Margaret ate sparingly, mindful of her dwindling funds. She needed to make her money last until she reached Silver Creek. 3 ladies sharing the back room tonight, the station keeper announced. Margaret gathered her small overnight bag and followed the other women to a cramped room with 3 narrow cots. Sleep came fitfully as she imagined what awaited her in Silver Creek. Would James Peterson be kind? Would she find contentment as a rancher's wife? The unknown loomed before her like the vast, dark landscape outside. Morning arrived with a brilliant sunrise that painted the desert in hues of gold and amber. Margaret watched it through the small window, mesmerized by the beauty of this harsh land. Perhaps she could find happiness here after all. The stagecoach resumed its journey with 2 new passengers: a salesman with an exaggerated mustache and a quiet man whose eyes seemed to assess every person and situation with calculated precision. Something about him made Margaret uneasy, though she couldn't articulate why. By midday, the stagecoach driver called out that they were approaching Cottonwood Springs, where they would stop for a meal and to change horses. Margaret's spirits lifted at the thought of stretching her legs and perhaps washing some of the dust from her face and hands. The station at Cottonwood Springs was larger than the previous night's accommodation, with a proper dining room attached. Margaret was savoring her first bite of apple pie when she overheard the quiet passenger speaking with the station keeper. "Heading to Silver Creek myself," he said. "Heard there's good opportunity there with the new silver strike." Margaret's ears perked up. "Excuse me, sir, did you say Silver Creek? That's my destination as well." The man turned, smiling. "Is that so, Maxwell Turner?" He introduced himself with a slight bow. "At your service, miss." "Margaret Wilson." She hesitated before adding, "I'm traveling to meet my fiancé." "Ah, lucky man," Mr. Turner said. "I know most folks in Silver Creek. Might I ask his name?" "James Peterson," Margaret replied. "He owns a cattle ranch outside of town." A strange expression crossed Mr. Turner's face. "Peterson, James Peterson, you say?" Margaret nodded, a chill running through her. "Do you know him?" Turner cleared his throat. "I believe I may have made his acquaintance. Tall fellow, dark hair going gray at the temples." "His letters didn't describe him in detail," Margaret admitted, "but he mentioned being 36 years of age. Ah, Turner said, nodding slowly. That sounds right. Something in his tone made Margaret anxious. Is there something I should know, Mr. Turner? Not at all, Miss Wilson. I'm sure you'll find Silver Creek most welcoming. He tipped his hat and moved away, leaving Margaret with a growing sense of disquiet. When they reboarded the coach, Mr. Turner took the seat beside her, leaning close enough that she could smell tobacco and whiskey on his breath. Miss Wilson, I hope you don't mind my saying so, but a young woman traveling alone in these parts can face certain dangers. Margaret stiffened. I'm quite capable of looking after myself, Mr. Turner. Of course, he said, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. But I feel I should tell you something about Silver Creek. It's a rough town, and not all men there are honorable. Margaret's stomach tightened. What exactly are you suggesting? Turner lowered his voice. You're Mr. Peterson. I don't believe he's quite what he's represented himself to be in his letters. You said you knew him, Margaret said, her voice rising slightly. I know of him, Turner corrected. And what I know gives me pause. Perhaps we could discuss it further when we stop for the evening. I have information that might be valuable to you. Margaret turned away, facing the window. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Turner, but I prefer to form my own impressions. The remainder of the afternoon passed uncomfortably. Margaret tried to focus on the landscape, but Turner's words echoed in her mind. What did he know about James Peterson? Was he simply trying to unsettle her, or was there truth in his insinuations? That evening, they stopped at another station, more isolated than the previous one. After a sparse dinner, Margaret retired early, hoping to avoid further conversation with Mr. Turner. However, as she was about to enter the women's sleeping quarters, he appeared in the hallway. Miss Wilson, a moment of your time, please. Margaret hesitated, then stepped back into the common room. Yes, Mr. Turner, he gestured to a chair near the dying fire. Please sit. What I have to tell you shouldn't be overheard. Against her better judgment, Margaret sat. Turner remained standing, towering over her. I feel it's my duty to tell you that James Peterson is not looking for a wife. He's looking for victims. I beg your pardon, Margaret gasped. He's written to at least 3 other women I know of. They arrive in Silver Creek with their life savings, and shortly after, they disappear. Peterson claims they changed their minds or moved on, but no one ever sees them leave town. That's preposterous, Margaret said, but her voice wavered. Why would he do such a thing? Money, Miss Wilson. Did he ask you to bring funds for your new life together? Margaret's blood ran cold. In his last letter, James had indeed asked her to bring whatever savings she had to help establish their household. She'd scraped together nearly $200 every penny she could manage. I can see by your face that he did, Turner said softly. It's his pattern. He preys on women who won't be missed. Why are you telling me this? Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I can help you, Turner said, sitting beside her. I'm actually a Pinkerton detective investigating Peterson, but I need proof to arrest him. A detective. You have no badge. I can't exactly announce myself as such on a stagecoach, Turner replied smoothly, but I can protect you if you'll help me catch Peterson in the act. Margaret stood abruptly. I need time to think. Of course, Turner said, but don't wait too long. We're only 2 days from Silver Creek now. That night, Margaret barely slept. Could Turner be telling the truth? The story seemed fantastical, yet doubt had taken root. What did she really know about James Peterson beyond his carefully penned letters? By morning, Margaret had made her decision. She would proceed cautiously, but wouldn't abandon her plans entirely based on a stranger's word. When Turner approached her after breakfast, she was ready. I've considered what you said, Mr. Turner. While I appreciate your warning, I cannot simply accept such accusations without proof. Turner's expression hardened. Then you're walking into a trap, Miss Wilson. Perhaps, Margaret replied, or perhaps you're not being truthful with me. Either way, I intend to reach Silver Creek and assess the situation myself. Then at least allow me to offer my protection for the remainder of the journey, Turner said. The roads become more dangerous as we near mining territory. That won't be necessary, Margaret said firmly, though a flicker of fear passed through her. The stagecoach departed, continuing its journey through increasingly rugged terrain. The atmosphere inside was tense, with Turner watching Margaret with undisguised frustration. The other passengers seemed to sense the discord and kept to themselves. By midday, the stagecoach driver announced they were entering Diablo Canyon, a notorious stretch known for ambushes. Margaret clutched her reticule tighter, painfully aware of the money sewn into the lining of her corset. The attack came swiftly. 3 masked riders emerged from behind a rocky outcropping, firing shots into the air. The stagecoach lurched to a halt as the driver shouted curses. "Nobody move," one of the bandits bellowed. "Hands where we can see them." The door was wrenched open. A masked man pointed his revolver at the passengers. "Valuables in the hat." Now, trembling, Margaret removed her mother's pearl necklace, her most precious possession besides her money. The other passengers surrendered watches, jewelry, and wallets. When the bandit reached Turner, something unexpected happened. Rather than appearing frightened, Turner seemed almost relaxed. "Took you long enough," he muttered to the bandit. Margaret's blood froze as realization dawned. This was no random robbery. Turner turned to her with a cruel smile. "Your money, Miss Wilson, all of it." "I don't understand," she stammered. "Don't play dumb," Turner snapped. "The $200 sewn into your corset. Peterson's not the only one who can spot a desperate woman with a nest egg." Terror gripped Margaret as Turner grabbed her arm, yanking her from the coach. "We'll need some privacy to retrieve your hidden assets," he said, dragging her behind a large boulder while the other bandits kept the passengers covered. "Please," Margaret begged. "That money is everything I have." "Should have thought of that before coming west," Turner said, reaching for her bodice. "Now we can do this easy or hard." A gunshot cracked through the air, causing Turner to freeze. "Step away from the lady," commanded a deep voice. Margaret turned to see a man on horseback, rifle raised and aimed squarely at Turner. He sat tall in the saddle, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw dusted with stubble and eyes as sharp as a hawk's. "This ain't your business, cowboy," Turner snarled, reaching for his pistol. The stranger fired again, the bullet kicking up dust inches from Turner's boot. "Next one won't miss. Hands up." Turner complied, fury etched across his face. Behind them, more gunshots echoed as the stagecoach driver and another passenger apparently found their courage and opened fire on the distracted bandits. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping his rifle trained on Turner. "Madam, you all right?" "Yes," Margaret managed, her voice shaky. "Thank you. Mitchell Grant," he introduced himself, not taking his eyes off Turner. "And you've had the misfortune of meeting Maxwell Turner, the lowest snake in the Arizona Territory." "You know him?" Margaret asked in surprise. "Every lawman from here to Texas knows him," Mitchell replied. "Con man, thief, and worse. Been tracking him for 3 days since he robbed a bank in Tucson." Turner lunged suddenly, drawing a hidden knife from his boot. Mitchell moved with surprising speed, striking Turner's wrist with the rifle butt. The knife clattered to the ground as Turner howled in pain. "Like I said," Mitchell continued calmly, "the lowest snake." The commotion at the stagecoach had settled. 2 bandits lay wounded on the ground while the third had his hands raised in surrender. Mitchell efficiently bound Turner's wrists with a leather strap. "Been hunting you a long time, Turner. Sheriff in Tucson will be mighty pleased to see you." As Mitchell marched Turner back to the stagecoach, Margaret followed, her legs unsteady. The driver was securing the other bandits, using the reins from their horses. "You a lawman?" the driver asked Mitchell. "Used to be," Mitchell replied. "Now I just ranch and occasionally hunt vermin like Turner here when they cause too much trouble." The elderly woman who had been kind to Margaret rushed forward, embracing her. "Oh, my dear, are you hurt?" "No," Margaret assured her, though she felt numb with shock. "Thanks to Mr. Grant." Mitchell tipped his hat to her, just happened to be in the right place. He secured Turner to the stagecoach wheel, then turned to the driver. "Garrison Station is about 5 miles ahead. The station master there can send word to the territorial marshal. You're not coming with us." The driver asked. "I'll ride alongside until we reach the station," Mitchell said. "Keep an eye out for any more of Turner's gang." As the passengers reboarded the coach, Margaret hesitated beside Mitchell. "Mr. Grant, I owe you my life and my livelihood. How can I ever repay you?" Mitchell's stern expression softened slightly. "No need for repayment, miss. Wilson, Margaret Wilson, Miss Wilson, just glad I was nearby. He paused, studying her face. If you don't mind my asking, what business brings you to these parts? Not many unaccompanied ladies travel this route. Margaret hesitated, then decided honesty was best. I'm traveling to Silver Creek to meet my fiancé, a Mr. James Peterson. Mitchell's expression changed instantly. Peterson, of the Double P Ranch. Yes, Margaret said, her heart sinking. Do you know him? Turner claimed he was, not honorable. Mitchell's jaw tightened. Turner was right about one thing, you need to be careful in Silver Creek. Then it's true, about Mr. Peterson. Margaret felt dizzy with dismay. The James Peterson I know died 3 years ago from influenza, Mitchell said quietly. His brother Martin took over the ranch, but he's not the marrying kind, never would have advertised for a bride. Margaret felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Then who have I been corresponding with? I don't know, Mitchell admitted, but I aim to find out. I'm heading to Silver Creek myself after I see these vermin safely handed over to the law. The stagecoach driver called for passengers to board. Margaret stood frozen, her carefully laid plans in ruins. Miss Wilson, Mitchell said gently. I can't tell you what to do, but if someone's impersonating Peterson, they don't have good intentions. I have nowhere else to go, Margaret confessed, her voice barely audible. Everything I own is in that trunk, and I've spent nearly all my money on this journey. Mitchell considered this, then made a decision. My sister runs a boarding house in Silver Creek. You'd be welcome there while we sort this out. Why would you help me? You don't know me. Let's just say I've seen enough good people taken advantage of in these parts, Mitchell replied. Board the coach, Miss Wilson. We'll talk more at Garrison Station. The journey to Garrison Station passed in a blur for Margaret. Turner sat in sullen silence, occasionally glaring at her with undisguised hatred. Mitchell rode alongside the coach, a reassuring presence in her peripheral vision. Garrison Station proved to be larger than the previous stops, almost a small settlement with a telegraph office. While Mitchell handed over Turner and his accomplices to the station master, who locked them in a sturdy storeroom until the marshal could arrive, Margaret sat in the small dining room, trying to gather her thoughts. What would she do now? Her destination was a lie, her future uncertain. The little money she had left wouldn't get her back east, even if she had anything to return to. Mitchell joined her after ensuring the prisoners were secure. He removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair with touches of gold where the sun had lightened it. His eyes, she now saw, were a clear blue that reminded her of summer skies in Boston. Telegraph's been sent, he said, sitting across from her. Marshal should be here by morning. He studied her pale face. You holding up all right? I'm not sure, Margaret admitted. Everything I planned. Plans change, Mitchell said simply. Question is, what do you want to do now? Margaret took a deep breath. I still want to go to Silver Creek. I need to know who's been writing to me pretending to be James Peterson. Mitchell nodded. Fair enough. But you'll stay with my sister while we investigate. Mary has a good head on her shoulders and runs a respectable boarding house. I can't impose. It's not an imposition, Mitchell interrupted. Mary would have my hide if I didn't bring you straight to her after what you've been through. The station master's wife brought them coffee and corn muffins. Margaret realized she was famished and ate gratefully. The stage will continue on in the morning, Mitchell said. I've asked them to hold your trunk here. We'll ride to Silver Creek together. It's faster on horseback, and we can avoid the main road in case Turner has more friends out there. I've never ridden a horse, Margaret confessed. Mitchell's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Then you'll ride with me. It's only about 30 miles. Mr. Grant, your kindness is overwhelming, but I must ask, why are you doing all this for a stranger? Mitchell was silent for a moment, turning his coffee cup slowly. The Petersons were good neighbors. If someone's using James's name to lure women out here, I want to know who and why. Besides, he added, his voice softening, my ma raised me to help folks in trouble. That night, Margaret slept in a small but clean room at the station. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt a measure of safety. Mitchell Grant was unlike any man she'd met, direct, capable, and seemingly without guile. If Turner represented the dangers of the frontier, perhaps Mitchell represented its virtues. Morning arrived with clear skies and a cool breeze. The stagecoach departed with the other passengers, who wished Margaret well. The station master promised to keep her trunk safe until Mitchell could send for it. Mitchell brought around a handsome chestnut gelding. "This is Rusty," he said, patting the horse's neck. "He's steady and strong. He'll carry us both just fine." He showed Margaret how to mount, then swung up behind her. She tensed at the unfamiliar proximity of a man's body, but Mitchell maintained a respectful distance, reaching around her only to take the reins. "Ready?" he asked. Margaret nodded, gripping the saddle horn tightly as Rusty began to move. The sensation of being on horseback was strange, but not unpleasant. Mitchell guided the horse expertly, setting a pace that wouldn't tire the animal with their double burden. As they rode, Mitchell pointed out landmarks and plants, teaching her about the territory that might become her home. He spoke of Silver Creek, a growing town with a silver mine, cattle ranches, and hardworking people trying to build something lasting. "The Double P Ranch is one of the oldest in the area," he explained. "James Peterson's father started it back in '42. Built it into something special before the Apache Wars claimed him. James took over, expanded the herds. When he died, his brother Martin inherited everything." "And what of your ranch?" Margaret asked. "The Rocking G isn't as big as the Double P, but it's mine. Worked as a Texas Ranger for 8 years to save enough to buy it. Been building it up for the past 3. You were a ranger. That explains how you handled Turner so capably." Mitchell shrugged. "Learned to read trouble early, saved my life more than once." They stopped at midday beside a small creek. Mitchell helped Margaret dismount, her legs stiff from the unaccustomed riding. He unsaddled Rusty, letting the horse drink and graze while he unpacked a modest meal of jerky, biscuits, and dried apples. "Not fancy," he apologized, "but it'll keep us going." They sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Margaret removed her bonnet, using it to fan her flushed face. The spring day had grown warm, and her traveling dress was too heavy for the desert climate. "Silver Creek is just beyond those hills," Mitchell said, pointing west. "We should arrive by late afternoon." "And then what?" Margaret asked softly. "First, we get you settled at Mary's, then I'll make some inquiries about who might be using the Peterson name." Margaret studied the man sitting beside her, his profile strong against the blue sky, his hands capable but gentle. In Boston, she would never have found herself alone with a man she'd just met. Yet here, everything was different. Survival depended on trusting the right people. "Mr. Grant," she began hesitantly. "Mitchell," he corrected. "Mr. Grant was my father." "Mitchell," she tried again, the informality strange on her tongue. "I want to thank you properly for saving me yesterday. You risked your life for a stranger." "Anyone would have done the same," he said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "No," Margaret insisted. "Not anyone. Turner and his men certainly wouldn't have. You're a good man, Mitchell Grant." He met her gaze then, his blue eyes serious. "Don't go putting me on any pedestal, Miss Wilson. I'm just a rancher trying to get by like everyone else out here." "Margaret," she offered in return. "If I'm to call you Mitchell, then you must call me Margaret." A small smile curved his lips. "Margaret, then." They finished their meal in companionable silence. As Mitchell saddled Rusty for the remainder of their journey, Margaret found herself watching his movements, the easy strength in his shoulders, the gentle way he spoke to his horse. He was nothing like the sophisticated Boston men she'd known, yet there was something compelling about his straightforward nature. Back on the trail, Mitchell told her more about Silver Creek and its inhabitants. The town had grown rapidly after silver was discovered in '68, but unlike many boom towns, it had developed a stable community of merchants, ranchers, and families. "Mary came out to join me 2 years ago after her husband died," Mitchell explained. "She was a schoolteacher back in Texas. Started the boarding house to give herself something to do, but now she's talking about opening a proper school in Silver Creek." "She sounds remarkable," Margaret said. "She is. Stubborn as a mule, but a heart as big as Texas. You'll like her." As they crested a hill in the late afternoon, Silver Creek came into view in the valley below. It was larger than Margaret had expected, several streets of wooden buildings, a church steeple, and homes spreading outward from the central business district. "There it is," Mitchell said. "Not San Francisco, but we call it home." They rode down into town, drawing curious glances from the townspeople. Margaret was acutely aware of her disheveled appearance after the long ride, but she sat as straight as she could, determined to make a dignified first impression. Mitchell guided Rusty to a 2-story clapboard house painted a cheerful yellow with white trim. A sign reading Silver Creek Boarding House hung beside the door. Flower boxes brightened the windows, and a neat picket fence enclosed a small front garden. Before Mitchell could dismount, the front door flew open and a woman hurried down the path. She resembled Mitchell with the same blue eyes, though her brown hair was streaked with silver. Mitchell Grant, no word for weeks and then you appear with a lady. What on earth? Hello to you too, Mary, Mitchell said, swinging down from the saddle. He helped Margaret dismount, steadying her as her legs threatened to buckle. This is Miss Margaret Wilson. She's had a difficult journey and needs a safe place to stay. Mary's expression softened instantly. You poor dear, you look exhausted. Come inside this minute. She shot her brother a look that promised he'd have explaining to do, but her attention quickly returned to Margaret. Let's get you settled with a hot bath and some proper food. The interior of the boarding house was neat and comfortable, with polished wooden floors and simple but tasteful furnishings. Mary led Margaret to a small bedroom on the second floor, where a brass bed with a colorful quilt looked impossibly inviting. Rest a moment while I heat water for your bath, Mary said. I'll bring up some tea as well. Left alone, Margaret sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the past 2 days. Her carefully planned future had disintegrated, yet somehow she didn't feel as afraid as she should. Mitchell Grant's unexpected intervention had changed everything, offering not just rescue but possibility. True to her word, Mary soon returned with tea, followed by a young maid carrying buckets of hot water for the hip bath, set up behind a screen in the corner of the room. Once the bath was prepared, Mary provided a clean nightgown and robe. These belong to my daughter, who's married now and living in Denver, she explained. They should fit well enough until we can retrieve your things. Take your time with the bath. Dinner won't be for another hour. The warm water was heaven on Margaret's aching muscles. She soaked until the water cooled, then dressed in the borrowed nightgown and robe. Her hair, freed from its pins, fell in dark waves down her back. She was braiding it when a knock came at the door. Margaret, it's Mary. May I come in? Yes, please. Mary entered carrying a tray with a bowl of stew, fresh bread, and more tea. I thought you might prefer to eat here tonight rather than join the other boarders. Mitchell's told me what happened on the road. He's been incredibly kind, Margaret said, accepting the tray gratefully. That's my brother, Mary said, sitting in the room's single chair. Heart as big as his shoulders. Now he says you came west to marry someone who's been misrepresenting himself. Margaret explained about the correspondence with the supposed James Peterson, showing Mary the letters she'd kept in her reticule. Mary examined the handwriting with a frown. I don't recognize this hand, but I know Martin Peterson well enough to say he definitely didn't write these. He barely manages to sign his name at the mercantile. Who would do such a thing? Margaret asked. What would they hope to gain? Money, most likely, Mary said frankly. It's happened before unscrupulous men luring women west with false promises, then robbing them or worse. She patted Margaret's hand. Thank the Lord Mitchell found you when he did. Yes, Margaret agreed softly. I seem to be in his debt twice over. Nonsense, Mary said briskly. Mitchell would be the first to tell you he only did what was right. She stood, smoothing her apron. Finish your supper and get some rest. Tomorrow's soon enough to figure out what comes next. After Mary left, Margaret ate the delicious stew, savoring each bite. Outside her window, Silver Creek was settling into evening, lights appearing in windows as families gathered for their evening meals. She had arrived at her destination, but nothing was as she had expected. The thought should have terrified her, yet instead she felt a strange sense of liberation. The arranged marriage that had seemed her only option now revealed itself as a trap she'd narrowly escaped. Whatever happened next would be her choice, not desperation's. With that comforting thought, she slipped between the cool sheets and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the curtains and the aroma of coffee and baking bread. Margaret dressed in her least wrinkled traveling dress, wishing for her trunk with its clean clothes. She pinned her hair simply, then made her way downstairs. The boarding house dining room held 3 tables, 2 occupied by gentlemen who stood politely when she entered. Mary emerged from the kitchen, beaming. "Good morning. I hope you slept well. Come have some breakfast. Mitchell will be here shortly." Margaret ate heartily, her appetite restored by rest and safety. Mary kept the coffee flowing, introducing her to the other boarders, a bank clerk and a silver assayer, both of whom treated her with courteous curiosity. Mitchell arrived as she was finishing, hat in hand, his face freshly shaved. He looked different in the morning light, younger somehow, though the watchful alertness in his eyes remained. "Morning," he greeted her. "You're looking better." "Amazing what safety and a bath can accomplish," Margaret replied with a small smile. "Mitchell, sit down and eat something," Mary ordered. "You're too thin." He complied with good-natured tolerance, accepting a plate heaped with eggs, ham, and biscuits. As he ate, he outlined his plan for the day. "I've asked around about who might be using James Peterson's name. Nothing certain yet, but there are rumors about a man named Wilkes who's been hanging around town for a few months. Keeps to himself mostly, but has money to spend despite no visible means of earning it." "Could he be the one who wrote to me?" Margaret asked. "Possibly. I'm going to ride out to the Double P today, talk to Martin Peterson, see if he knows anything about Wilkes or anyone else who might be involved." "I'd like to come with you," Margaret said, surprising herself with her boldness. Mitchell and Mary exchanged glances. "It's a fair distance," Mitchell said carefully, "and I'm not sure what we'll find." "I've come thousands of miles to meet the man I was corresponding with," Margaret said firmly. "I won't cower in safety while you investigate on my behalf. Besides, Mr. Peterson Martin might recognize the handwriting in the letters." Mitchell studied her determined expression. "All right," he conceded, "but we'll need to get you properly outfitted first. You can't ride that distance in a city dress." Mary nodded approvingly. "I have just the thing." Ellen Miller left some riding clothes when she moved to California. They might fit Margaret with a few adjustments. An hour later, Margaret stood before the mirror in Mary's bedroom, hardly recognizing herself. She wore a split skirt of sturdy brown fabric, a simple white shirtwaist, and a fitted jacket. Borrowed boots completed the outfit. "You look like a proper Western woman," Mary declared. "Just need a hat to keep the sun off." She produced a straw hat with a moderate brim. "This should do nicely." Mitchell waited downstairs, his expression shifting to appreciation when Margaret descended. "Ready to ride?" he asked, his voice slightly gruff. "As I'll ever be," Margaret replied. This time, Mitchell had brought a second horse, a gentle gray mare named Pepper. "She's Mary's, but she doesn't ride much anymore. Pepper will take good care of you." Under Mitchell's patient instruction, Margaret learned the basics of mounting, holding the reins and guiding the horse. By the time they left town, she was sitting more confidently, though still clinging to the saddle horn when Pepper broke into a trot. The Double P Ranch lay 10 miles outside of Silver Creek, a sprawling property with extensive pastureland and a substantial ranch house. As they approached, Margaret's anxiety mounted. What would she say to Martin Peterson? How would she explain her presence? A ranch hand directed them to the main house, where a tall, lean man with a shock of gray hair was repairing a porch railing. He looked up as they approached, squinting against the sun. "Mitchell Grant," he called. "Been a while. What brings you out this way?" "Need to talk to you, Martin," Mitchell replied, dismounting and helping Margaret down from Pepper. "This is Miss Margaret Wilson. She's come all the way from Boston with some questions about your brother." Martin Peterson's weathered face registered surprise. "Boston? James has been gone 3 years now, miss. God rest his soul." "I know," Margaret said. "That's part of what we need to discuss." Inside the ranch house, Martin's housekeeper served coffee while Margaret explained about the correspondence and her journey west. Martin's expression darkened as she spoke. "Someone's been using my brother's name. That's lower than a snake's belly." He examined the letters Margaret produced. "This ain't James's writing, that's for certain, and it sure ain't mine." "Do you know anyone who might do such a thing?" Mitchell asked. "Maybe someone who knew James well enough to know about the ranch, his personal details." Martin stroked his chin thoughtfully. "James kept to himself mostly, especially after his wife died. But he did have a ranch manager for a while, fellow named Wilkes. Clayton Wilkes. Let him go about a year before James passed," caught him skimming money from cattle sales. Mitchell and Margaret exchanged glances. Wilkes, Mitchell repeated. About 40, dark hair, walks with a slight limp. That's him, Martin confirmed. Nasty piece of work. I heard he was back in these parts, but I ain't seen him. He's been in Silver Creek, Mitchell said, staying at the hotel, spending freely. He turned to Margaret. This has to be our man. But why? Margaret asked. What could he hope to gain by luring me here? Money, for starters, Martin said bluntly, and he'd know about the Peterson property. Maybe figured he could claim to be James's heir somehow, use a wife to make it look legitimate. Mitchell's jaw tightened. We need to find Wilkes, but carefully. If he realizes we're onto him, he might run or worse. Martin nodded grimly. I'll ride into town with you. This involves my family's name. Besides, he added with a hint of a smile, I'd like to see this scoundrel's face when he realizes his game is up. The ride back to Silver Creek was tense, each lost in their own thoughts. Margaret's mind whirled with questions. How many women had Wilkes lured west with his false promises? What might have happened to her if Turner hadn't revealed his scheme, or if Mitchell hadn't intervened in town? They stabled the horses at the livery and headed to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Barnes, a stocky man with an impressive mustache, listened to their story with growing concern. Fraud is serious enough, he said, but if he's done this before, there's no telling how far he'd go. I haven't had any reports of missing women, but that doesn't mean much. Folks come and go in a mining town. We need to catch him in the act, Mitchell suggested. If Margaret approaches him as planned, acts like she believes he's Peterson. Absolutely not, Sheriff Barnes and Martin said in unison. It's too dangerous, the sheriff continued. We don't know what this man is capable of. I agree it's risky, Margaret said slowly, but I want to help stop him. Other women might not be as fortunate as I was. Mitchell studied her face. You're sure about this? I am, Margaret said firmly. The sheriff reluctantly agreed to a plan. Margaret would meet Wilkes at the hotel dining room that evening, pretending she had just arrived in town. Mitchell, Martin, and the sheriff would position themselves nearby, ready to intervene. We'll be right there the whole time, Mitchell assured her as they walked back to the boarding house. He won't have a chance to harm you. I know, Margaret said. I trust you. At Mary's, Margaret changed back into her city clothes and repinned her hair more formally. Mary insisted on lending her a brooch to look the part of a prosperous bride-to-be. Be careful, Mary whispered as she helped adjust Margaret's collar. Mitchell would never forgive himself if anything happened to you. He hardly knows me, Margaret protested softly. Mary smiled knowingly. My brother doesn't rescue just anyone, Margaret. And he certainly doesn't bring just anyone home to me. The hotel dining room was busy that evening, which worked in their favor. Margaret was seated at a table with a clear view of the entrance, nervously sipping water as she waited. Mitchell sat at the far side of the room, pretending to read a newspaper. The sheriff and Martin positioned themselves in the lobby. At precisely 7 o'clock, a man entered the dining room, pausing to survey the tables. He was handsome in a polished way, with dark hair slicked back and an expensive suit. He walked with a slight but noticeable limp. When his gaze fell on Margaret, recognition flashed in his eyes. He approached with a practiced smile. Miss Wilson, Margaret Wilson. Margaret rose, extending her hand. Mr. Peterson, James Peterson, indeed, he said, taking her hand and pressing his lips to it. What a pleasure to finally meet you in person. You're even lovelier than I imagined. Thank you, Margaret said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I only arrived in town today. I was delayed by difficulties on the road. Nothing serious, I hope, Wilkes asked, helping her back into her chair. Bandits, Margaret said, watching his reaction carefully. They robbed the stagecoach. How dreadful, Wilkes said, though his eyes showed no real concern. You weren't harmed, fortunately not. A passing traveler intervened. Wilkes signaled the waiter for wine, then leaned forward. Well, you're safe now, and soon you'll be settled at the ranch. I've been so looking forward to your arrival. Margaret forced a smile. As have I. Your letters painted such a vivid picture of our future together. Speaking of the future, Wilkes said smoothly, did you bring the funds we discussed for our new household? Yes, Margaret replied. I have $200, everything I could gather. Wilkes's smile widened. Excellent. We can discuss the wedding arrangements tomorrow. Tonight, let's celebrate your arrival." The waiter returned with wine. As Wilkes raised his glass in toast, Sheriff Barnes approached the table. "Clayton Wilkes?" he asked pointedly. Wilkes froze, his expression flickering between confusion and alarm. "I believe you're mistaken. I'm James Peterson." "No," Martin said, stepping forward. "You're not. James Peterson was my brother, and he's been dead for 3 years." Wilkes bolted from his chair, knocking over the wine. He shoved past the sheriff, heading for the door, but Mitchell was faster. He intercepted Wilkes, blocking his escape. "It's over, Wilkes," Mitchell said quietly. Wilkes reached inside his jacket, but Sheriff Barnes was on him in an instant, wrestling him to the ground. A knife clattered across the floor. "Clayton Wilkes, you're under arrest for fraud and attempted assault," the sheriff announced, handcuffing the struggling man. "You can't prove anything." Wilkes snarled. "The letters alone are evidence," the sheriff replied calmly, "and I suspect once we start asking around, we'll find other women you've targeted." As the sheriff led Wilkes away, Mitchell approached Margaret, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said, realizing it was true. The fear and tension were draining away, replaced by relief. "It's over." Martin Peterson cleared his throat. "Miss Wilson, I want to apologize for what you've been through because of this scoundrel using my family's name. If there's anything I can do to make amends." "You have nothing to apologize for, Mr. Peterson," Margaret assured him. "You're as much a victim of his deception as I am." Later, walking back to the boarding house with Mitchell beside her, Margaret felt lighter than she had in months. The evening air was cool, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "What will you do now?" Mitchell asked. It was the question Margaret had been avoiding. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have no reason to return east, but I haven't exactly made a promising start here." "I'd say surviving fraud, bandits, and helping catch a criminal is a pretty impressive start," Mitchell observed. Margaret laughed softly. "When you put it that way." They reached the boarding house, but neither moved to go inside. Instead, they stood in the garden, the scent of Mary's roses surrounding them. "Silver Creek could use someone like you," Mitchell said after a moment. "Mary's been talking about starting a school, and she mentioned needing someone with proper Eastern education to help. A teacher." Margaret considered the idea. "I did assist at a girls' school in Boston for a time. Just a thought," Mitchell said. "No pressure, you've got time to decide." "Thank you," Margaret said, touched by his consideration, "for everything." Mitchell's eyes held hers. "I'm glad our paths crossed, Margaret Wilson." "As am I, Mitchell Grant," she replied softly. In the weeks that followed, Margaret settled into life in Silver Creek. Mary was delighted to have her help planning the school, and the town council quickly approved their proposal. Margaret's trunk arrived from Garrison Station, and she moved from the boarding house to a small cottage near the newly designated schoolhouse. Clayton Wilkes confessed to defrauding 3 other women before Margaret, though he claimed he had merely taken their money and sent them away disappointed, not harmed them. Whether that was true remained uncertain, but his sentence of 5 years in the territorial prison ensured he wouldn't target anyone else for some time. Mitchell visited Margaret often, initially with the excuse of helping repair her cottage, then simply to share meals and conversation. They discovered shared interests in literature and music, and differences that sparked lively debates rather than discord. On a warm evening in June, 2 months after her arrival in Silver Creek, Mitchell invited Margaret for a ride to a spot he wanted to show her. They followed a stream that wound through his property until they reached a small meadow filled with wildflowers, a perfect view of the mountains beyond. "It's beautiful," Margaret breathed, dismounting with the easy grace she'd developed through regular riding. "I come here to think," Mitchell said, spreading a blanket on the grass. From his saddlebag, he produced a small picnic bread, cheese, fruit, and a bottle of wine. "Thought you might appreciate it too." They ate as the sun began its descent, painting the mountains in gold and purple. Margaret had never felt so at peace, so at home. "I received a letter from Boston yesterday," she said. "The family who bought my parents' house found some items in the attic photographs, my mother's jewelry box. They're sending them to me." "That's good news," Mitchell said. "Connections to your past are important." "Yes," Margaret agreed, "but I'm finding that building a future matters more. She looked at him directly. I'm grateful my plans went awry, Mitchell. If they hadn't, I would never have found Silver Creek. Or you. Mitchell took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Margaret, I need to tell you something. When I first saw Turner dragging you behind that rock, something happened to me. I'd tracked him for the bank robbery, but in that moment, all I could think was that I needed to protect you. You did, Margaret said softly, and I want to keep doing that, Mitchell continued. Not because you need protection, you've proven how capable you are, but because I've fallen in love with you. Margaret's heart soared. I've fallen in love with you too, Mitchell. These past weeks have shown me what a true partnership could be. Mitchell reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small wooden box. I carved this, he said, opening it to reveal a ring with a small but perfect diamond. It was my mother's. I've been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment. It's perfect, Margaret whispered, tears filling her eyes. Margaret Wilson, will you marry me? Not because you need security or because I need a wife, but because we've found something rare together. Yes, Margaret said without hesitation. Yes, I will. As Mitchell slipped the ring onto her finger, the setting sun gilded the mountains in a final blaze of glory. Margaret thought of the long journey that had brought her here, not to the arranged marriage she'd expected, but to something far better. Love built on respect, honesty, and shared values. They were married in September, with Mary organizing a celebration that brought the entire town together. Martin Peterson gave the bride away, having become a friend and mentor to Margaret in her new life. The school opened a week after the wedding, with 15 eager students and Margaret as its first teacher. She split her time between teaching and helping Mitchell with the ranch books, discovering a talent for business that complemented his skill with cattle and land. By their first anniversary, the Rocking G had expanded, and Margaret was expecting their first child. The journey that had begun in desperation had led to a life richer than she could have imagined. On a crisp October evening, Mitchell found Margaret on the porch of their ranch house, one hand resting on her growing belly as she watched the sunset. Any regrets? He asked, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Margaret leaned into his embrace. Only that I worried so much at the beginning. Everything that seemed like disaster was actually guiding me home. Mitchell pressed a kiss to her temple. Then I'm grateful for mail-order bride schemes, unscrupulous bandits, and all the rest that brought you to me. As am I, Margaret agreed with a laugh. Though perhaps we'll tell our children a slightly less dramatic version of how we met. I don't know, Mitchell teased. It's a pretty good story. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, planning their future in the land that had tested them both and brought them together. The road had been long and dangerous, but it had led exactly where Margaret needed to be, not to the security of an arranged marriage, but to the lasting joy of true love found in the most unexpected circumstances.